The evening in the upscale restaurant was like any other, save for the unmistakable air of anticipation hanging in the air. The bustling sound of clinking silverware, the chatter of well-dressed patrons, and the soft background hum of the jazz band playing in the corner created a familiar ambience. But tonight, something was different. There was an undeniable tension that seemed to radiate from the large, corner booth near the window. A group of well-dressed people had gathered there, laughing loudly, clinking their glasses, and indulging in their own private world. At the center of it all was a woman in her late 30s, dressed in an extravagant black gown that looked far too expensive for a dinner out. Her perfectly manicured nails twinkled as they rested on the table, her sharp eyes scanning the room with a sense of superiority that made it impossible to ignore her presence. Her name was Claire Vanston, an heiress, socialite, and the type of woman who was used to getting what she wanted. She spoke in the kind of tone that was both demanding and dismissive, an unspoken expectation that those around her should cater to her every whim. And tonight, her focus was on the young waiter who stood nervously beside her. The young man was named Michael Carter. He had a gentle demeanor and the look of someone who had seen his fair share of hardships in life. His clothes weren't as pristine as Claire's, and his posture, though respectful, betrayed the weariness of a man who worked tirelessly to make ends meet. He had been working here for almost a year now, but it never seemed to get easier. The long hours, the rude customers, and the constant pressure to be perfect weighed on him, but he kept going. He had to. He needed this job, and he needed to keep it if he had any chance of improving his life. Tonight, as with every other, he had been assigned to Claire's table. He had seen her before, a woman who was known for her cruelty and her cutting remarks. She never hesitated to put people down, particularly those who worked in service. But tonight, something felt different. Michael could feel her eyes on him, her gaze sharp and calculating, as if she were waiting for an opportunity to strike. "Well, aren't you a quiet one?" Claire's voice broke through the murmur of the room, her words directed at Michael with a venomous edge. She had noticed him standing there, awkwardly holding a notepad, ready to take her order. Michael looked up, his gaze briefly meeting hers, before he quickly looked down again, trying to hide his discomfort. "How can I help you, ma'am?" he asked, his voice steady despite the knot tightening in his stomach. "You're new here, aren't you?" Claire asked, her eyes narrowing as she studied him. "I don't think I've seen you before." Michael nodded quickly, a forced smile crossing his face. "Yes, ma'am, it's my first time waiting on your table." Claire let out a small, almost condescending laugh. "Well, this should be interesting," she said, before turning to her friends at the table. Her voice was loud enough for everyone in the restaurant to hear. "I always enjoy a bit of entertainment when I go out for dinner. Don't you, ladies?" She leaned back in her seat, her eyes not leaving Michael as she surveyed him with a look of mockery. The other women at the table chuckled, some nodding in agreement, others quietly observing the interaction. Michael could feel the weight of their gazes, the quiet judgment that filled the space between them. Claire's eyes glinted with mischief as she looked at Michael once again. "You know," she began, her voice dripping with sarcasm, "you look like you could use a little extra income. How about you entertain us for a moment? Sing a song. I'm sure you've got a nice little talent hiding in there somewhere, don't you?" The room seemed to go still at her words, and Michael's heart sank. He had heard of people being asked to perform for tips before, but never like this, never as a form of mockery. He could feel the sweat gathering on his palms as he stood there, trying to process what she was saying. His mind raced, but all he could do was stand there and hope that this moment would pass quickly. Claire, sensing his hesitation, leaned forward, a wicked smile spreading across her face. "Come on, now. Don't be shy. I bet you can't even hold a tune. Prove me wrong." The challenge was clear. She wasn't just asking him to sing, she was daring him. And everyone at the table, and in the restaurant, was waiting for him to make a move. Michael's mind swirled in panic. He had never been a performer. He had never been the type to put himself in the spotlight. His life had been about survival, about keeping his head down and doing the work that no one else wanted to do. But now, standing here under the weight of Claire's ridicule, he felt cornered. He didn't want to sing. He didn't want to entertain her, or anyone else, for that matter. But the pressure was unbearable. The laughter of Claire's friends had become louder, more insistent, and Michael's heart pounded in his chest. He could feel the blood rushing to his face, the humiliation seeping in. He couldn't say no. Not here. Not in front of all these people. With a deep breath, Michael took a step back, his eyes darting to the piano in the corner of the room. The restaurant had a grand piano, always kept in pristine condition, but it was rarely used. The musicians usually played jazz, light background music. Michael's gaze locked onto it, and suddenly, an idea formed in his mind. It was reckless, but it was the only option he had. "I can sing," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. The words sounded strange coming from his lips, but he forced them out. "But I need some music." Claire raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "Music?" she scoffed. "Are you some kind of professional? Go on then, sing. But I'll warn you, it better be good." Michael didn't wait for her to finish. He moved quickly to the piano, his hands trembling as he placed them on the keys. The soft sound of the piano began to fill the space, and he let his fingers flow across the keys without thinking. The first notes were shaky, tentative, but something inside him started to click. As the music filled the air, he could feel the tension in his body start to release. The melody he played wasn't something he had rehearsed or planned. It was a song that had been inside him for years, a song that he had never dared to sing out loud. It was raw, emotional, and filled with a depth of feeling that no one expected from him. And then he began to sing. At first, his voice was quiet, almost hesitant. But as the notes rose, something incredible happened. His voice gained strength, growing in power with each passing second. The audience, still and silent, began to listen, drawn in by the raw emotion behind the song. Michael's voice resonated through the room, rich with a depth of pain and beauty that surprised even him. It was as if the very essence of his soul was pouring out with every word. Claire and her friends were no longer laughing. They were no longer mocking him. They were transfixed. The rest of the restaurant, too, had fallen silent, their attention fixed entirely on the young man at the piano. Michael's hands moved confidently now, his voice rising in pitch, the melody swelling to a crescendo. He was no longer the timid waiter who had been humiliated just moments ago. With each note, he became someone else, someone powerful, someone unrecognizable. When the final note hung in the air, the silence was deafening. It seemed to stretch for an eternity. Then, as if on cue, the room erupted in applause. But Michael didn't hear it. He was too caught up in the moment, his mind spinning from the unexpected surge of emotion. He had done something he never thought possible. Claire, her expression a mix of awe and disbelief, sat frozen in her seat, her mouth slightly agape. She had been expecting a show of weakness, of vulnerability. But what she got instead was something far more powerful. Michael slowly stood up from the piano, his heart pounding, his breath still coming in short bursts. He wasn't sure what had just happened, but he knew one thing: he had just changed everything. The rich woman, the one who had mocked him only moments before, now looked at him with a mixture of surprise and regret. She had underestimated him. And now, she was beginning to realize that there was far more to this young waiter than she had ever imagined. But what was this hidden talent? And why had it taken so long for him to find it? As Michael walked away from the piano, his mind swirled with 100 questions. The silence in the room was still palpable after Michael had finished singing. His hands, still trembling, hovered over the piano keys as the weight of the moment seemed to settle around him. He had never done anything like this before, never allowed himself to feel this exposed. As he made his way back to the kitchen to collect his thoughts, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. The events of the past few minutes felt almost surreal, as if he had just stepped into a different world, one where his talents were recognized, but at a heavy price. As he entered the kitchen, the usual hustle and bustle of his colleagues seemed distant. The clang of pots and pans, the rush of orders being called out, and the familiar hum of the kitchen's low heat did little to ground him. His mind was still on the crowd, still on Claire, and that inexplicable moment when his voice had taken on a life of its own. "Michael, you okay?" Jenna, a fellow waiter, called out from across the room, noticing his distracted expression. "You've been in here for a while. Everything all right?" He forced a smile. "Yeah, just needed a second." His voice was steady, but inside, his thoughts were swirling. He couldn't deny that he was shaken, but there was also something else, something that whispered in the back of his mind, urging him to dig deeper into what had just happened. "You sure?" Jenna walked over, concern creasing her brow. "You were just out there, looking like you might pass out or something. What happened?" Michael shook his head, trying to shrug it off. "Just nerves. Nothing big." But Jenna wasn't convinced. "You're telling me you didn't see their faces?" Jenna pressed, her tone softening. "Claire and her friends, they looked shocked. I've never seen anyone do that to them before. Whatever you did out there, it wasn't just singing. It was something else." Michael didn't know how to explain what had happened. He had never been one to talk about his emotions or his struggles. His entire life had been about survival, about making it through each day. But Jenna had a way of making him feel like he could talk. She was one of the few people here who had ever shown any real kindness. He sighed, resting his elbows on the counter. "It's like, I don't even know. One minute, I'm just standing there, trying to get through it, and then the next, I'm singing like I've done it my whole life. I don't even know where it came from. It's like I felt it, you know?" Jenna nodded slowly, her eyes thoughtful. "Maybe you've been holding it all in. Maybe this whole time, you've been more than just a waiter. You've got something inside you, and it just needed the right moment to come out." Michael glanced at her, a sense of unease creeping over him. "I don't know. I'm just a guy who's trying to make it through. I'm not. I don't know anything about being some kind of performer. This doesn't feel like me." "Maybe," Jenna said with a grin, "but you are something else. You just don't know it yet." Before Michael could respond, the kitchen door swung open, and their manager, Mr. Davis, walked in. His usually stern face was gripped with a mixture of excitement and surprise. "Michael," Mr. Davis called out, his voice carrying over the noise. "Can I see you for a moment?" Michael nodded, his heart sinking slightly. He had been dreading this moment. He couldn't help but wonder if Mr. Davis had somehow seen the performance as a liability, something unprofessional, and he feared the consequences of it. As he walked out of the kitchen, he could feel his nerves tightening again. Mr. Davis was standing in the corner near the storage room, his arms crossed and his expression unreadable. "Sit down, Michael," Mr. Davis said, his voice calm but with an undercurrent of something else. Michael hesitated before sitting, trying to remain as composed as possible. "You know," Mr. Davis started, his eyes locking onto Michael's, "that was a surprise. I've worked in this business a long time, and I've never seen anyone quite like you. Where did that come from?" Michael shifted uncomfortably in his seat, unsure of how to respond. "I don't know, sir. I didn't plan it. It just happened." Mr. Davis raised an eyebrow, clearly not satisfied with that answer. "Well, it sure was something. You've got the entire restaurant talking about it. I've never seen Claire Vanston so speechless before. People are saying that you've got something special. You might want to consider doing more of that talent of yours. Who knows? It could change things for you." Michael felt a cold chill run down his spine at the mention of Claire's name. He knew who she was, of course. Claire Vanston was a well-known figure in the city, a wealthy, powerful woman with a reputation for getting whatever she wanted. But Michael wasn't interested in the kind of attention Claire could bring. He had worked hard to stay under the radar, to avoid being noticed by people who would just use him. "I'm not sure I understand, sir," Michael replied slowly. "What exactly are you suggesting?" Mr. Davis leaned forward, lowering his voice. "I'm suggesting that maybe you don't just wait tables for a living. Maybe you've got a future in music. We're talking about the kind of talent that could get you noticed. People like Claire Vanston can open doors for you. And she's not the only one with connections, believe me." Michael shook his head, confusion and discomfort flooding his thoughts. "I'm just here to work, Mr. Davis. I don't want any trouble." Mr. Davis sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Michael, listen. I'm not saying you have to take the spotlight, but you've got an opportunity here. You've got something people want. And I've been in this business long enough to know when someone's got star potential. This could change everything for you. The question is, are you ready to step up?" Michael didn't respond right away. His mind was racing, his thoughts spinning. Could it really be that simple? Could he really have some hidden talent, something that could propel him out of this life of struggle and into something more? But even as that thought flickered through his mind, there was another part of him, an older, more cynical part, that wondered what the price of such a shift might be. After a long pause, Michael finally spoke, his voice firm but unsure. "I don't know what you're offering, sir. But I'm just here to work." Mr. Davis looked at him with a mixture of understanding and frustration. "All right, Michael. But don't say I didn't warn you. Talent like yours doesn't stay hidden forever. It gets noticed, whether you want it to or not." As Michael left the office, his mind was in turmoil. He couldn't deny that a part of him wanted to believe in the possibility of something greater, something beyond the life he had known for so long. But the other part of him, the part that had learned to stay grounded, to keep his expectations low, was wary. Could this really be the start of something bigger? Or was it just another way for the world to use him and throw him away when it no longer suited their needs? He didn't know the answers, but one thing was certain, whatever had just happened at that piano was far from over. It was only the beginning. As the evening wore on, Michael did his best to go about his duties as usual, but his mind was elsewhere. Every time someone mentioned his performance, every time someone praised his talent, the weight of it all seemed to grow heavier. What had started as an uncomfortable moment in front of a mocking woman had now turned into something far bigger than he could have imagined. And as the night wore on, the question hung in the air, what would Michael do next? The days that followed Michael's unexpected performance at the restaurant were a whirlwind of confusion and unsettling thoughts. He tried to keep his head down, focusing on his work and ignoring the whispers of his colleagues. But it wasn't easy. Every time he walked through the dining area, people would glance at him with a mixture of curiosity and admiration, their eyes following him as if he were something to be studied. He felt like a specimen in a cage, being watched, dissected, judged. The restaurant had become a different place for him, as if the very air had changed after the song. His co-workers treated him with a strange reverence, some of them even offering him more praise than he was comfortable with. Even the managers seemed to look at him differently. Mr. Davis had become more insistent, casually mentioning opportunities that Michael had never considered. But there was one person who seemed to be the most affected by the events of that night, Claire Vanston. Michael couldn't shake the memory of her face, her disbelief, her eyes wide with something he couldn't quite place. It had been so clear, she had thought he was just another waiter, another person to look down on. But then, for the briefest of moments, he had made her look at him with awe. A strange mix of emotions washed over him whenever he thought about her. There was a part of him that wanted to prove to her that he wasn't someone to be trifled with, that he was more than just the man who took her orders. But another part of him was deeply uncomfortable with the idea of seeking her approval. He had spent so much of his life avoiding people like her, the rich, the powerful, the ones who believed they could control everything and everyone around them. And yet, here he was, caught in her gaze, her influence like a magnetic pull that he couldn't escape. It was a few days later when Michael found himself once again in the restaurant, walking through the staff entrance, his thoughts heavy as usual. He was trying to ignore the lingering whispers that followed him around, pretending that nothing had changed. But deep down, he knew things would never be the same. As he moved toward the kitchen, he was stopped by Jenna, who seemed even more eager than usual. "Hey, Michael. You got a minute?" she asked, her eyes wide with excitement. "Yeah, what's up?" he replied, still distracted. Jenna's expression shifted to one of serious intent. "So, you know that Claire Vanston, right?" Michael froze. Claire's name seemed to hang in the air, heavy and unavoidable. He hadn't expected to hear her mentioned again, especially not so soon. "Yeah," Michael muttered, trying to sound nonchalant. "What about her?" Jenna leaned in closer, lowering her voice. "Well, I overheard her talking to Mr. Davis. She wants you to come to a private event. Apparently, she's having some kind of gathering at her place this weekend, and she personally requested that you perform." Michael's heart dropped into his stomach. He could feel the blood rush from his face. "What? She wants me to perform?" Jenna nodded. "Yup, it's a big deal. You've got a fan in her, Michael. And you've got a fan in Mr. Davis, too. He thinks this could be your chance." Michael could hardly wrap his mind around what Jenna was saying. His pulse quickened. He had no idea what Claire wanted with him. This was beyond anything he had ever imagined. He wasn't a singer, not in the way people expected. He was just a man trying to get through each day. "I don't know," he muttered, shaking his head. "This doesn't feel right. I don't know what she's really after. I can't just go to her house and perform for her. I didn't even plan what happened the other night." Jenna placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Hey, listen. You've got a gift, Michael. People don't just request performances like that unless they're impressed. This could change everything for you. It could get you out of here." Michael looked down at his feet, lost in thought. He had been running from this moment for so long, not wanting to face the fact that he had more potential than he realized. But now that the world was knocking on his door, demanding that he embrace this side of himself, he felt terrified. It wasn't just about singing. It was about stepping into an unknown future, one that could either lift him up or tear him apart. Later that evening, Michael found himself standing at the entrance of Claire's lavish estate. The gates were tall and ornate, flanked by security guards who eyed him suspiciously as he approached. He couldn't help but feel out of place. The building itself was massive, an opulent mansion that screamed wealth and excess at every turn. He had never been in a house like this before, and it made him feel small, insignificant. As the gate swung open, Michael followed the long, winding driveway toward the front steps, his stomach in knots. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking into a trap. But his feet kept moving, each step drawing him closer to the unknown. The mansion loomed before him, its towering columns and manicured gardens overwhelming in their grandeur. When he reached the door, a staff member opened it with a smile that was too perfect, too practiced. "Mr. Carter," the man said, ushering him inside. "Please, follow me." Michael didn't speak as he was led through the mansion. Every room he passed seemed to be filled with rich art, exquisite furniture, and expensive decor. He couldn't help but feel like he was in a world that didn't belong to him. His world was much smaller, much simpler. The stark contrast made him uneasy. He wasn't used to luxury, and everything in this house reminded him of how far removed he was from the life Claire Vanston led. At last, they arrived at a large ballroom, where the gathering was being held. The room was filled with well-dressed guests, each of them chatting in small groups, sipping cocktails, and laughing in a way that made Michael feel even more like an outsider. Claire was at the center of it all, surrounded by a group of wealthy men and women who all seemed to hang on her every word. When she saw Michael, her eyes lit up with that same gleam he had seen the other night. She moved toward him quickly, her steps confident and graceful. "Michael," she greeted him warmly, her voice a little too loud for the occasion. "So glad you could make it. I hope you didn't have too much trouble getting here." Michael forced a smile, trying not to let his discomfort show. "No trouble at all." Claire took his arm and led him toward the piano at the far end of the room, the eyes of the guests following them. She seemed to enjoy the attention. "Come on, Michael," she said, her voice almost purring. "I've heard you sing once, and I need to hear it again. I know you've got more to show us. Impress my guests." Michael's mind raced. He had not come here to perform for a crowd of strangers. But the pressure was mounting. Everyone was watching. He could feel the weight of their stares, the unspoken expectation in the air. They were waiting for him to live up to the image they had of him. The man who could sing. The piano was waiting for him. It was beautiful, just like everything else in the room, polished, flawless. He swallowed hard, forcing himself to take a deep breath. The music in his chest swelled again, as it had before, and he couldn't deny the pull. "Fine," he said softly, more to himself than to her. "I'll do it." Claire smiled, clearly pleased, as she took a step back. The room fell silent, everyone waiting with bated breath. Michael's fingers hovered over the keys. He wasn't sure what song would come out. It didn't matter. The music, his music, would guide him. As his fingers pressed down, the soft melody filled the room, and Michael closed his eyes, letting the music take over. As the first few notes echoed through the room, something strange happened. The music came alive beneath his fingers. It wasn't just the notes, it was the feeling. The emotion surged through him, and he began to sing. His voice, deep and rich, filled the space around him. The people in the room held their breath, stunned by the raw power in his performance. Michael was no longer just a waiter. He was someone else entirely. He was a force, an undeniable presence, something that couldn't be ignored. And as he sang, something began to shift in the room. The air seemed to hum with anticipation, and the guests, who had once been so dismissive, now listened intently, as if they were hearing something sacred. But Michael couldn't shake the feeling that Claire was more than just a spectator. She was watching him closely, her eyes narrowed, as if she were trying to decipher something in him. Something more than just the music. To be continued. The applause was deafening. Michael's hands were still trembling as he took his fingers off the keys, the final note of the song hanging in the air like a suspended moment. The crowd stood frozen for a moment, stunned into silence before erupting into applause. But it felt distant to him, almost unreal. The high-pitched clapping and the chorus of "Bravo" washed over him, but it couldn't drown the thoughts that were racing through his mind. He had never intended to be the center of attention, especially not in a room filled with people who had more wealth, more power, and more influence than he could ever dream of. But here he was, in the midst of it, his voice still echoing through the grand ballroom, the spotlight on him in ways he never expected. Michael quickly stood up from the piano, his legs shaking beneath him. He was not accustomed to being praised, especially not like this. He had always worked in the shadows, blending in, trying to survive. He had never sought fame, and he definitely hadn't wanted to be someone's entertainment. But now that he had given the performance, he could feel the pressure mounting. Claire Vanston was the first to approach him. She moved toward him with a swift, practiced grace, her heels clicking against the polished floor. Her eyes gleamed with something close to admiration, or was it conquest? Michael wasn't sure. "That was extraordinary," she said, her voice low but clear. She smiled, but there was an edge to it that Michael couldn't quite place. "You've really got something, Michael. I knew I wasn't wrong about you." The other guests gathered around him, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and praise. Michael tried to avoid eye contact, his mind still trying to process what had just happened. He could feel their eyes on him, studying him as if he were some kind of rare specimen. "Who knew the waiter could sing like that?" one of the men in the crowd said, a hint of disbelief in his voice. "Absolutely captivating," another woman commented, her voice thick with intrigue. "You could really go far with this talent of yours." Michael nodded awkwardly, not sure how to respond. He had never been one for small talk or idle chatter, and this attention was overwhelming. He just wanted to escape, to go back to his life where things were simpler, where he could disappear into the background. But here, under the bright lights, there was nowhere to hide. "Michael, come with me," Claire's voice cut through his thoughts. "I want to show you something." Before he could protest, she had already taken him by the arm, gently but firmly guiding him through the crowd. Michael didn't resist. What else could he do? He had already gotten himself into this mess, and now, he had to navigate the consequences. As they walked, Claire continued to speak, her tone almost playful, but with an underlying sense of command. "You really have no idea how rare your talent is, do you?" she asked, glancing at him over her shoulder. "People would pay a fortune to hear a voice like yours. You could have anything you wanted, Michael. Fame. Money. Influence." He remained silent, unsure how to respond to her words. The truth was, he had never thought about any of those things. He had never wanted to be famous. He had never thought about money beyond what he needed to survive. His world had always been small, his job at the restaurant, the long hours, the exhausting shifts. He had never allowed himself to dream beyond that. Now, in the glittering world Claire inhabited, he was beginning to wonder if he was completely out of his depth. They stopped in front of a large set of double doors, and Claire opened them with a flourish. "After you," she said, stepping aside to let him enter. Inside, the room was dimly lit, with walls lined with art and shelves filled with books. It was a private study, far removed from the opulent ballroom they had just left. A heavy sense of quiet hung in the air, and Michael could feel the weight of the space pressing in on him. He took a few steps inside, glancing around at the rich, dark wood furniture and the tastefully chosen decorations. Claire closed the door behind them, her eyes still fixed on him. "Sit," she said, gesturing toward the leather chair across from her. "I want to have a conversation." Michael did as she asked, sitting down and feeling the soft leather conform to his body. He suddenly felt out of place, like a visitor in a world he could never truly understand. Claire settled into the chair across from him, folding her legs elegantly. "Now," she began, her voice soft but insistent, "I want to talk about your future." "What do you want, Michael? You've got an incredible gift, and it's only a matter of time before someone recognizes it. You don't want to be stuck waiting tables forever, do you?" Michael shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He wasn't sure how to answer her. He had never really thought about his future. He had lived day to day, simply trying to get by. But now that he was being offered a glimpse of something more, something bigger, he wasn't sure how to react. "I don't know what I want," he admitted quietly. "I never really thought about it. I just work, you know. I get by." Claire smiled, a knowing smile that made Michael uneasy. "You don't have to worry about getting by anymore. You've got the potential to do more than that. All I'm asking is for you to consider the possibilities. You could be performing on the biggest stages. You could make millions. And I'll make sure that happens. All I need from you is your trust." Michael was taken aback. Trust? How could he trust someone like Claire Vanston, someone who had built her entire life on money, power, and influence? She had no idea what it was like to struggle, to scrape by. He didn't know if he could trust her, or anyone in this world that seemed so far removed from his own. But Claire wasn't done. "I've got connections," she continued. "I know the right people, people who can help you get where you need to go. You've got the talent, Michael. All you need is the right push." The way she spoke was almost hypnotic. Her words wrapped around him, drawing him in like a web he couldn't escape. She wasn't just offering him an opportunity, she was offering him a chance to be part of her world. The world of luxury, fame, and privilege. It was a world he had never imagined himself in, and yet, it felt like everything he had ever wanted. Still, doubt gnawed at him. There was something in Claire's gaze, something calculating beneath her smooth exterior. He didn't know if he could trust her, but part of him was tempted to believe that this was the way out, the way to something greater than he had ever dreamed of. "I'll need some time to think about it," Michael said finally, his voice steady despite the storm of thoughts swirling in his mind. Claire's smile didn't waver. "Of course. Take all the time you need. But don't take too long. Opportunities like this don't last forever." As she stood to leave, she paused at the door, glancing back at him with a look that was both alluring and cold. "You have no idea what kind of power you could wield, Michael. I can help you. But only if you're ready to take the leap." With that, she left the room, leaving Michael alone with his thoughts. The quiet of the study felt suffocating now, and the weight of her words hung in the air like a cloud that refused to disperse. He sat there, staring at the empty space where she had been, torn between the fear of the unknown and the undeniable pull of something greater than himself. It wasn't until the next day that Michael found the courage to confront his own feelings. He was sitting in the small apartment he rented, nothing extravagant, just a modest space where he could keep his head down and survive. But now, the walls seemed to close in on him, as if the very room was a reminder of everything he had ever wanted to escape from. He couldn't stop thinking about Claire's offer, about the life she was dangling in front of him like a carrot. He had always been good at surviving, but had he been living? Had he been content just existing in the shadows? The truth was, Michael didn't know what he wanted anymore. The music he had discovered within himself was both a gift and a burden. It had opened doors he never imagined would be available to him, but it had also exposed him to a world he wasn't sure he belonged in. He thought back to Claire's words, "Trust me." Could he? Was it worth risking everything for a chance at something he couldn't even define? As he sat there in the silence, the decision weighed on him. The easy thing would be to walk away, to stick with what he knew. But the temptation to take that leap, to step into the unknown, gnawed at him. Would this be the moment that changed everything? Michael couldn't remember the last time he had slept soundly. It had been days since that night at Claire Vanston's mansion, and each day felt like it stretched endlessly in front of him, taunting him with the weight of his indecision. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the faces of the guests, their eyes glued to him, their faces filled with admiration, wonder, and expectation. The memory of Claire's cold, calculated smile haunted him. It was as if he had stepped into a world that was both seductive and dangerous, a world where every move mattered, where every decision could either lift him to unimaginable heights or destroy him completely. That night, as he lay awake in his small apartment, staring at the ceiling, the phone on his nightstand buzzed with a text message. The name on the screen made his heart skip a beat. It was Claire. "Have you had time to think? I'm waiting for your answer, Michael. The clock is ticking." The words seemed to echo in his mind, each letter burning into his thoughts. She had given him a deadline, a reminder that time was running out. She wasn't going to wait forever, and neither was the opportunity she offered. Michael had spent the last few days replaying every moment of his life, the choices he had made, the things he had endured, the people he had tried to avoid. He had spent so much of his life trying to stay invisible, trying to remain unnoticed, but now, it seemed as if the world had found him. And he had to decide whether he would embrace it or run from it. The life Claire offered was a stark contrast to everything he had known. He could see it in his mind, the crowds, the applause, the fame, and the wealth. It was everything he had never dreamed of, and yet everything he had secretly longed for. But it was also everything he feared. Was this world really what he wanted? Could he handle the pressure? Would he become just another puppet, controlled by people like Claire, used for their own amusement? He couldn't deny the allure of it, the chance to leave behind his mundane life, to never worry about paying rent or wondering how he would make ends meet. But there was a dark side to it, too. Claire had made it clear that everything came with a price. Her world wasn't just about talent, it was about power, manipulation, and control. She had made it clear that he had to trust her. But trust was something Michael didn't give easily. That morning, as the sun broke through the curtains and bathed his small apartment in a warm, golden light, Michael finally made a decision. It wasn't just about the fame or the money, it was about what kind of person he wanted to be. He could choose to stay in the shadows, to live the life he had always known, or he could step into the light and take a chance. But as he looked at the phone in his hand, he realized that he wasn't making this choice alone. There was something else at play here. Something deeper. The fear that had held him back all these years, the fear of failing, of being exposed for who he really was, had to be confronted. If he was going to do this, he would have to face it head-on. He pressed his thumb against the screen and typed a response, his fingers moving almost automatically. "I'm in. Let's do this." His heart raced as he hit send, the words now out there in the world. There was no turning back. But even as he sent the message, a part of him wondered if he had made the right choice. It wasn't long before Claire's response came through, almost immediately. "Good. I knew you'd make the right decision. I'll have my people contact you to set everything up. You'll be performing at an exclusive event next week. It's time for the world to see you, Michael." Her words were laced with authority, and Michael couldn't shake the feeling that he had just signed a contract with the devil. But there was no time for second thoughts now. He was in, and there was no turning back. Over the next few days, Michael's life began to spiral into a whirlwind. Phone calls, emails, meetings with people he had never imagined he would meet, agents, managers, publicists. They all came out of the woodwork, eager to capitalize on his newfound talent. The attention was overwhelming, and every time he walked into a room, he felt like he was being dissected, analyzed, and prepared for something he didn't fully understand. But through it all, there was one constant, Claire. She was always there, always just a step ahead of him, guiding him through every decision, every meeting. Her presence was inescapable, like a shadow that loomed over everything he did. She was the one pulling the strings, and Michael could feel it. She was a master of the game, and he was just a pawn. One afternoon, he found himself sitting in a sleek, modern office building downtown, waiting for his meeting with Claire's team. The lobby was cold and sterile, with polished marble floors and glass walls that seemed to reflect the emptiness of the space. As he sat there, the reality of what he had agreed to began to sink in. This wasn't just about singing. It wasn't just about music. This was about entering a world that didn't care about who you were, only what you could do for them. And Michael wasn't sure he was ready for it. A man in a sharp suit entered the lobby and approached Michael. He was tall, with dark hair and an air of self-assuredness that immediately made Michael feel small. "Mr. Carter," the man asked, extending his hand. "I'm Jonathan. I'll be your manager going forward." Michael stood up and shook his hand, trying to keep his composure. "Nice to meet you." Jonathan gave him a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I've heard a lot about you, Michael. Claire's been very impressed. We're excited to have you on board." Michael nodded, unsure of how to respond. He wasn't used to this level of attention, and he didn't know if he ever would be. "We've got a lot to discuss," Jonathan continued, "but first, we need to get you prepared for your performance next week. We've arranged for a vocal coach, a stylist, and a PR team to help you get ready. You're going to need to be in top form." Michael blinked, his mind racing. Next week? That's soon. Jonathan smiled, but it wasn't a comforting smile. It was a smile of someone who knew exactly what was at stake. The world doesn't wait, Michael. The moment you're in, it's already past. You have to be ready to step up, or you'll be left behind. You're the star now, and stars don't get to hesitate. As Jonathan spoke, Michael felt a sinking feeling in his stomach. This wasn't just about performing for a crowd. This was about becoming something, someone, that he didn't recognize. The pressure was mounting, and it felt like everything was happening too fast. But before he could process everything, Jonathan handed him a packet of papers. "These are the details for your performance," he said. "You need to sign them. It's a standard contract for someone in your position. Don't worry, it's all in order." Michael glanced at the contract, feeling the weight of it in his hands. He had never been one to sign papers without reading every detail, but in this world, it seemed like everything moved too fast to question. He was being swept up in something that felt too big for him, and yet, he couldn't resist it. There was something about the spotlight, about the chance to finally break free from his old life, that made him want to take the leap. He signed the papers without a second thought, the pen scratching across the page. As he did, he couldn't help but feel like he was selling his soul. The night of the performance arrived faster than Michael had expected. He stood backstage, his heart pounding in his chest. He was dressed in a sleek black suit, his hair styled perfectly, his face masked with a layer of makeup that made him feel like a stranger in his own skin. The venue was massive, an elegant theater that could seat thousands. The air was thick with anticipation, and Michael could feel the weight of it all. The lights, the cameras, the eyes of the audience, all of them were focused on him, waiting for him to perform. "Are you ready?" Jonathan's voice cut through the chaos, and Michael turned to find him standing in the doorway, a clipboard in his hands. "I don't know," Michael admitted, his voice shaky. Jonathan gave him a reassuring smile, or what he hoped was reassuring. "You've got this. Just remember, you're not doing this for yourself. You're doing this for the people who made you." Michael's eyes narrowed at the implication. "The people who made me? You mean Claire?" Jonathan didn't answer immediately, his eyes flickering with something unreadable. "Just go out there and do what you're good at. The rest will take care of itself." And with that, Michael stepped out onto the stage, the bright lights blinding him as he faced the crowd. The music started, and he took a deep breath. It was time. Time to show the world who he was, for better or worse. The stage lights were blinding. Michael's eyes squinted against the onslaught of brilliance as he walked to the center, his heart pounding in his chest like a drum. He was a stranger to this kind of pressure, to this kind of spectacle. The crowd in the theater had grown silent, their breath held in anticipation. Every inch of the space seemed to be watching him, expecting something. But what? Could he even deliver? His body felt heavy, as though the weight of the moment was pressing down on him with every step he took. He had only ever performed in small spaces, never in front of a crowd like this. The grandeur of it was overwhelming. The stage seemed endless, the audience a sea of faces he couldn't see clearly but could feel. The sound of their whispers, their hushed tones, was all around him. But now, as he stood there, waiting for the music to begin, the silence was deafening. Michael's throat was dry, his fingers cold. He had to keep it together. This was it. The opportunity he had asked for. The moment he had been given. His heart screamed with fear. But there was a strange calm within him too. He was in the center of it all, and now, there was no turning back. He could feel the weight of Claire's expectations, the world she had promised him, hanging in the air like an unspoken threat. "You're not doing this for yourself," Jonathan had said. "You're doing it for the people who made you." But whose expectations was he truly living for? The music began, a soft, melodic piano piece that seemed to surround him like a cloud. It was his cue. Michael took a deep breath, the tension in his body giving way to something else. He reached for the microphone, his fingers trembling as he grasped it. He could feel the sweat gathering on the back of his neck. He had never been this scared in his life. The piano music filled the air, its notes floating like ghosts around him. For a moment, Michael closed his eyes, listening to the rhythm, the pulse. He had always known that music had power, but now, standing here, it was more than that. It was everything. It was his only way out of the life he had known. It was his escape. The first words of the song left his lips before he even realized it. He sang softly at first, his voice almost tentative, unsure. But as the melody swelled, so did his confidence. Something inside him seemed to snap into place, and his voice began to rise with the music. He could feel the audience's eyes on him, their expectations building with every note. But the more he sang, the more he felt a strange freedom, like he had been waiting for this moment his entire life. He wasn't just singing for them. He wasn't singing for Claire, or Jonathan, or anyone else. He was singing for himself, for the first time in his life. As the song reached its crescendo, his voice rang out with power, raw emotion vibrating through his words. The fear that had plagued him for so long seemed to vanish, replaced by a fierce determination. This was it. This was the moment he had been waiting for. And then it happened. The crowd, once silent, erupted into applause. The sound was thunderous, overwhelming, like a wave crashing against the shore. Michael stood there, stunned, his heart still racing. He had done it. He had performed. But more than that, he had poured something of himself into it, a part of his soul that he hadn't even known existed until now. For a moment, everything went quiet again. The applause faded into the background, and all that was left was Michael standing alone on the stage, the lights now dimming around him. His breath came in ragged gasps as he tried to steady himself, to regain his composure. Claire was sitting in the front row, her eyes fixed on him with that same calculating intensity that had always been present. But now, there was something more. There was admiration, respect, and perhaps something deeper, something Michael couldn't quite place. She was pleased. But what did that mean for him? What did it mean for the future he had just stepped into? Michael's thoughts were interrupted as Jonathan appeared by his side, his face lighting up with excitement. "That was incredible, Michael!" Jonathan exclaimed, clapping him on the back. "You've just done it. This is going to change everything." Michael didn't respond immediately. The adrenaline was still coursing through him, and the words didn't seem to make sense. He had done it, yes. But what did it really mean? Was he just another performer, just another person to be used for someone's entertainment? He had stepped into this world willingly, but the more he thought about it, the more it felt like it wasn't just his choice anymore. "Come on," Jonathan continued, oblivious to Michael's inner turmoil. "Let's go backstage. You've got a lot of people waiting to meet you." Michael followed Jonathan down the darkened hallway, still processing everything. He didn't know if he was happy, relieved, or terrified. Maybe all of it at once. Backstage, the reality of the situation began to settle in. There were agents, publicists, and photographers waiting for him. They swarmed him like bees to honey, all eager to talk to the new star in town. Michael couldn't even keep up with the rapid-fire questions being thrown at him. His head was spinning. He had just performed in front of hundreds of people, people who saw him as a commodity, a star, a product. The applause was still ringing in his ears, but now it felt hollow. It was no longer just about his voice, it was about everything that came with it, the attention, the pressure, the expectations. For the first time, he could feel the weight of what Claire had promised him. Fame. Fortune. Power. All of it was right there, at his fingertips. But at what cost? Through the chaos, Claire finally approached him, her calm demeanor cutting through the noise. She looked different now, almost softer, as though the performance had changed something in her too. She smiled at him, her eyes gleaming. "You were magnificent," she said, her voice low and almost intimate. "You've made an impression. People will remember this night." Michael nodded, his mind still clouded. "Thank you," he said, though the words felt disconnected, distant. Claire tilted her head, studying him. "You don't look happy. This is what you wanted, isn't it?" He paused, the question hanging in the air. Was it? Had he wanted this? To be admired, to be seen, to be wanted in the way that Claire and her world saw him? He looked at her, and for the first time since meeting her, he saw her clearly. She wasn't just the woman who had offered him fame and wealth. She was someone who had spent her life building this empire, manipulating people to fit her vision of success. And maybe, just maybe, she saw him as nothing more than another tool in her vast machine. But was that all he was? A pawn in her game? Or was there something more to it, something that he could own for himself? His mind raced, torn between two realities, the world he had known, and the world that was being thrust upon him. "I don't know what I want anymore," he admitted, his voice quieter now. "This isn't what I expected." Claire's eyes softened, and for a brief moment, she seemed almost human, vulnerable, even. "It never is," she said, her tone gentler now. "But you're here. And that means you have a choice." A choice. The word echoed in his mind. He had made a choice when he stepped onto that stage, but had he really chosen? Or had the choice been made for him? The more he thought about it, the more it seemed like he was just following the path that Claire had laid out for him. As the night wore on, Michael's mind remained unsettled. He had given a performance that had dazzled an audience, but the applause had faded, and the weight of the decision he had made settled heavily on his shoulders. He had stepped into this world willingly, yes, but at what cost? The fear, the doubt, the uncertainty, all of it threatened to swallow him whole. By the time the event was over, and the last of the guests had left, Michael found himself standing alone in the empty theater. The lights were dimmed, the stage quiet. It was just him now, standing in the center of a world that was both his and not his, trying to make sense of it all. As he stepped off the stage and walked toward the exit, he realized something: no matter what choices he made from here on out, they wouldn't be his alone. He had entered a world that would always demand something from him. The applause might fade, but the cost of living in the spotlight was a price he wasn't sure he could pay. The excitement of Michael's performance quickly turns into an internal conflict as he grapples with the reality of the world he's entered. His relationship with Claire becomes more complicated as he begins to question whether this path is truly what he wants. The tension between his desires and the manipulation of the world he's been thrust into comes to the forefront, leaving him at a crossroads that could change everything. The reader is left wondering whether Michael will continue down this path or find a way to reclaim his identity.